Walking out of the theater, I was very enthusiastic about Mission Impossible Final Reckoning just due to the strength of the final hour and specifically the final action set piece that takes place on a biplane. That is reason enough to go see this movie. However, 24 hours later, I've been thinking a lot about this movie and what went wrong because this movie just doesn't feel like the Mission Impossible series that has really revitalized itself over the past 10 years. There is just a lot of weird continuity things in this movie. There's a lot of nitpicks that I had. There was just some bizarre plotting that really just dragged down this movie and didn't make it the satisfactory conclusion I was hoping for Tom Cruise 30 years into this franchise. We can talk about whether this is the actual ending, but either way, I wanted to get into this and where this movie just falls apart for me in moments and the reasons I think this movie struggles to be successful. With that all said, I am going to be talking spoilers in some points of this review. However, when I do, I'm going to have a visual that pops up on screen, and I am also going to have an audio cue. That way you know that there are spoilers coming up. In my description below, I will have time codes so you can just kind of skip around once you see a spoiler. Reason number 10, a Mission Impossible film lives and dies by its action set pieces. And one of the things I found quite frustrating about Final Reckoning is there just isn't a lot of action within this film. Now, I mentioned the biplane sequence that is the finale of this film. That is incredible. Just flat out. This is one of the best sequences I've ever seen in a movie. It's one of the highlights of 2025 for sure. With that all said, this is a 2 hour and 50-minute movie, and 30 minutes of a great sequence isn't enough to save this movie. There is so little action in this movie. There is a few quick fights sequences that take place in the beginning, one that's briefly in a prison. Then you have a few hand-to-hand combat sequences involving the Palm Clementif character. And her sequences are really good in this movie. She has really good hand-to-hand combat. Again, a character that needed to be more in this film. But ultimately, besides that, and Ethan having like one or two hand-to-hand combat sequences, a few gun shootouts that are very brief, there just isn't a lot of action in this movie. And like I said, let me make it clear, the biplane sequence is the reason to see this movie. It does not disappoint. What you see in the trailer, it's somehow like outperforms that. Like, I couldn't believe what I was watching during this sequence where I watched a movie and I'm like, this movie just is an action movie that just doesn't have a lot of action, which the Mission Impossible is renowned for its action. So not having it was kind of annoying for me. Reason number 9 I struggled with this movie is the plotting of this movie is an absolute mess. I could not believe the script writing for this movie, especially coming from Christopher McQuarrie, who's now been just like such a well-oiled machine with Tom Cruise, that the fact that we got this movie was shocking to me, especially considering this is not his first rodeo with the Mission Impossible series. He has written everything since the 5th movie, so to see his 8th movie just fall apart with terrible plotting was such a disappointment to me. What's great about this series is how easy the mission is to follow. There is not a lot of plotting required. Ethan needs to do the impossible thing. He eventually figures out a way to do it, and that is it. That's so straightforward formula that has worked time and true again for this franchise. Not in this movie. The issue is the villain in this movie is just horrendous, and that villain I'm specifically referring to is the Entity, this AI program that's basically infecting the world that's going to lead to nuclear disaster / fallout. And the plot is just so convoluted. There is nothing that this movie can latch on to. It is so exposition heavy just due to the Entity being this metaphysical force in the movie. And having it be this metaphysical force just means the movie is by definition non-climactic, and it's a lot of people talking in a room about an AI program. That's just not very exciting, especially when you have this AI program that essentially works kind of as a cheat code for the world of Mission Impossible, and where it can just think and be so extreme in everything, and everything then gets extremity from that. Like, everything balloons in scale and scope from it, which means nothing kind of has weight in this movie. And so much of this movie ends up just being a bunch of people in rooms talking about the Entity. It is such a poorly paced movie. Ethan and his team talks about the Entity. You have the president and her team talking about the Entity. You have Gabriel, the villain of this movie, monologuing about controlling the Entity. And It's just so much. The first 75 minutes, which I want to talk about later, really just drives home the point of this is so dialogue heavy in a franchise that just never has been the strength of these films. The dialogue can be good, the banter can be good, but the plotting of this movie is just bizarre in a way that I was just so annoyed with. It was so needlessly convoluted. Reason number 8 I struggled with this movie, and I mentioned his name earlier, and it is the name Gabriel, the villain of this movie, played by Esai Morales. And I just want to just put this out here. I haven't thought much about this point, but I'm just going to say it. I think Esai Morales is by far the worst villain in the Mission Impossible franchise. Let me know if you disagree with that claim, but I don't know how many people will be. He's so over the top. In the first movie that he's introduced in, which is Dead Reckoning, he seems to have this personal vendetta against Ethan Hunt, and they seem to have this dynamic from their past. And that's actually an interesting thing. I thought he was much better in the last movie. In this movie, I just don't think he has anything to work with, and I also just found the actor to just be so over the top annoying in this movie. He is just a cartoon in this movie. I quite literally mean it. He could be in a Looney Tunes movie with how crazy and over the top he's going. He has been marked for death essentially by the entity. He is now kind of working as his own rogue agent. And a quick spoiler about this movie, the entity is the villain in Dead Reckoning. In this movie, Gabriel is really the villain. The entity does nothing in this movie besides steal government codes on the nuclear weapons, so Gabriel is left really the antagonist of this film. It just doesn't work. One, the entity is so set up in the first movie. He's messing with Ethan Hunt the entire time. It's this kind of psychological warfare that Ethan is in this movie. And in this movie, the entity, we barely see him in it. We just see a lot of what he's doing, or we hear a lot of what he's doing. And there just becomes so much wrong with the Gabriel character. Why does he hate Ethan Hunt so much? I know it's talked about a little bit in Dead Reckoning, but he just doesn't make sense. It's just the limitations of this writing, and then just having no clue what to do with the Gabriel character, which is such a disappointment because this character has all the potential. And here's the big spoiler, because he kills two of the most important characters to Ethan. He kills Luther in this film, and of course in the last movie he killed Ilsa, the Rebecca Ferguson character, so he should have this kind of dynamic with Tom Cruise's character of Ethan Hunt. He just doesn't. I don't know if it's because this actor just isn't capable of it. Again, I just didn't think this actor was well utilized within this movie. And true, the writing for him is just so over the top terrible. I couldn't believe how bad the villain was. Another thing I found very annoying about this movie is these are the people that Ethan cares most about. And this is my reason number 7, is the fact that they're just not in this movie a lot. The juice of this movie is the team. The team is really what makes this movie. Yes, they are interchangeable. Sometimes you get Jeremy Renner, Alec Baldwin, Paula Patton, Rebecca Ferguson, so on and so forth. But what makes these movies great is the team dynamic. And in this movie, we don't get that. These characters are all separated. And I wanted to see more of these characters interacting together. And I think this specifically hurts the newest comer of this film, which is Hayley Atwell, who I think is actually quite good in Dead Reckoning, and I find her quite boring in Final Reckoning. In Dead Reckoning, she gets to basically share every scene she's in on that film with Tom Cruise. She is always interacting with Tom Cruise. In this movie, isolating Tom Cruise and having him do his own thing and his team being on their own kind of like mission that is in tangent with Tom Cruise is just such a poor decision and kind of takes away what I really like about this film. And I also wanted to see some of the consequences for this team. Significant dire things happen to characters within this film, and I wanted to see them react and deal with those emotions and all that. And this movie just deprives you of that. I think it's such a bizarre thing for us to spend so much time with these characters, and then when some of the big emotional payoffs happens for some of these characters, we just don't get to see that within this film. I found that quite disappointing within Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Which brings me to my point number 6, which is the dourness of this film. I couldn't believe how self-serious this movie was. These movies are so much fun because of the Tom Cruise effect on this movie. He is an actor that is riffing on everyone from Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Jackie Chan, Johnny Knoxville. He is doing it all. He is a jester and we are the court. The movie theater is his audience. And he puts himself at risk for this. And then Benji gets to be the character that kind of gets to react to the craziness of seeing Ethan Hunt do this, in which he essentially is the audience speaking of this. The stakes of the movie are always high in the Mission Impossible films, but they always find levity in the comical performance that Tom Cruise is often doing in these movies. That's what makes Tom Cruise a movie star. He is able to capture the highest of highs in the adrenaline and the stakes of a movie without compromising the charm of a Tom Cruise character. And in this movie, it's just not there. He is still Tom Cruise. He is still a powerful presence on the big screen. He still delivers in big ways in this movie. I think he gives a really good performance in this movie. It's just the fact isolating all these characters takes away some of the magic of the Ethan Hunt character and left me disappointed. It is so fun to see him in these situations. So even during the biplane sequence, which is the best part of this movie, I wanted the Benji interaction to this scene, kind of the craziness of this and the manic energy that these movies are able to capture in this. Not having that energy, it just makes the mission feel too impossible for me. And that was something that I didn't respond to. The stakes are always dire within the Mission Impossible films, but so much of it is de-escalated by the comedic forces at work in this movie that give this movie always a sense of fun. Mission Impossible Final Reckoning just doesn't have that release valve, and I noticed it quite desperately. And that brings us to our number 5 point, speaking of release valves. And this is going to be a new segment I am going to introduce. It's called my Norman Rockwell Taking a Stand Freedom of Speech segment. I'm still working on my name for this, but this is something that I just really noticed myself a little just like lackluster with, which is a submarine sequence. This movie has a huge portion of its movie underwater. You've seen a little bit of clips of it in the trailers. They do a really good job of not like revealing what this sequence is in the actual movie. And I just have to be honest, the submarine underwater stuff for me just didn't have the impact that I was kind of hoping it will. I will just say Christopher McQuarrie directs the hell out of these sequences. I think they are very well staged, cleverly crafted. It's just they just didn't work for what I wanted from this movie. And I think that's also part due to this happening basically at the halfway point of this movie, which meant I had to put up with the first 75 minutes of this movie, which I just, again, found very dull. So we are beginning this movie with this dull chunk of time, which then leads to a submarine sequence, which is all largely controlled, very calm, a lot of just heavy breathing, and it's a very quiet, intimate, meticulous sets piece. That can have its charm and effect within these movies. In this movie, I needed a little bit higher of stakes. And I think this scene could have worked better if the first 75 minutes allows this scene to have just a little bit more breathing room. But by the time you get to this scene, you are just desperate for anything, that when I saw this scene, I'm like, yeah, this is impressive, but I still wanted more from it. It's just the issue with the 75-minute sequence is the quietness of this scene, which is so comparable to the first 75 minutes, which is also very quiet and just a lot of people talking. You're like, this is where we need to start escalating the stakes. I just don't think this film ever does that well. And I think it's just completely a pacing issue, which we now need to get into this. And number 4 might be my biggest sin of the movie, which is the first 75 minutes of this movie. And I've been kind of hinting around it. I've implied it. And you've probably heard it. If you've read any review on this film, you've probably heard the beginning of this film is a little rough to get through. That's a little bit of an understatement. There are good sequences in this first 75 minutes. There's a really effective one with Luther that happens around the 30-minute mark. Like, there is stuff in this movie that works. It's just that, like, it's so meticulously slow and so heavy in exposition. And I have to be completely honest, I will never watch the first 75 minutes of this movie ever again. I don't see a scenario where I would ever watch this movie unless I am truly just going through and watching all the Mission Impossible films from beginning to end as like kind of a sit-down viewing. Anything like that, outside of that, I just don't ever see myself needing to revisit the first 75 minutes of this movie. I just don't think there's really anything there to grapple on. This movie is also just weirdly poorly edited for the first half of this movie. Again, I don't know if this was the COVID shoot. I don't know if it was splitting these films into two parts. I don't know what happened, but part one just has some baffling editing choices in timeline. It's not particularly like linear. You're kind of like flash forwarding and flashing back. It's just a bizarre way to tell this story. And again, in a franchise that has never really done this, I just thought it was so weird. And again, I think it's also the fact of I can't really justify these movies being two parts. Now, there's so much action in it that I also understand that this movie really couldn't be a 4-hour movie, and I don't know what I would lose necessarily, because I do really like part one, which is already at 2 hours and 45 minutes. So I know that's also a tough thing to say. It just kind of feels like maybe if you just added like 30 minutes of the biplane sequence to the last movie, is that really all the enjoyment I would have gotten out of it, and it would have been a much more exciting movie? Because ultimately this movie just doesn't justify its 2 hour and 50-minute runtime. And it's specifically because the first 75 minutes of this movie are just honestly at times just dreadful. There's so much just like mess and added on mess that didn't need to be there, which kind of brings me back to point number 3. My reason number 3, this messiness that doesn't need to be there. There is constant callbacks within Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Some of the lows of this movie are just trying to tie this franchise into a neat little bow. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you get Angela Bassett in here, returning from her role as the CIA director in Mission Impossible 3, now coming back within Final Reckoning as the President of the United States. It's nice to see her character in this movie. I have to also fully admit, I did not care about this character arc or this character story going on. I wanted to spend my time with Ethan. However, it's still nice to see Angela Bassett in this movie, and the scenes that she has with Ethan are quite effective. There are times where I like the callbacks. In the opening credits, I also like when they reference events that happen. So like there's a flashback where we get to see the Kremlin bombing. There's other people reacting to their relationship with Ethan Hunt. So, for instance, the Kremlin bombing is mentioned when one character is like, isn't he the guy that bombed the Kremlin? Like, all that. Like, that's all in this movie. That stuff I like. Some of those characters coming back is fun. What I didn't like is the idea of kind of like shoehorning like connective tissues within this franchise that had clearly never set it up to be that way. For instance, there's an event that happens in part 1, or I should say the first movie, that's also mentioned in Dead Reckoning, of basically how these characters are all intertwined. And then in this movie, there is specifically a retcon done to Mission Impossible 3 with the rabbit foot. And I'm just like, wow, this is a real low for this series, where I'm just like, why are we doing this? Why are we expecting our audience to know so much about Mission Impossible franchise? That's not why we watch these movies. Yet there are things that work in Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, which we need to talk about the big one. I've been kind of skating around it, and this is reason number 2. This is the biplane sequence, and it's going to be like, you're going to think like, why is this an issue then? Well, let's talk about that. This, for me, is the height of cinema. This biplane sequence is quite literally one of the best things I've ever seen shot on film. This is one of the most glorious stunt pieces I've ever seen. I think this might be in a really impressive Tom Cruise legacy of stunts. This might be his most daring, his most ambition, the craziest stunt that I've seen. We're watching it. I was like, I don't know how he's doing this. Tom Cruise had to have died filming this scene. There's no way that any person could do this without dying. Like, it is such a physical reaction watching this movie. And it's the reason we go to these movies. It's the reason that when I saw this on the biggest screen, which I still suggest everyone seeing this movie on the biggest screen, in a packed audience that I got to see it with, it's the reason that after the sequence, the audience applauded. It's that incredible of a scene. That is the magic of this movie. And it's just so well shot. It's so well directed. It's also another silent set piece where there's not really any talking in it. It is just the reason these movies work. And it makes the rest of the movie so much frustrating because you're like, oh, you do have the goods. You just didn't decide to bring them out that much. It was very frustrating for me watching this movie and thinking that, where I'm just like, hey, I want more from this. I want more of this. Because when you deliver this, this is my favorite thing ever. So not giving it to me is really annoying in a franchise that constantly indulges its audience on that. Like, that is the reason we go to see these movies. Again, that's not to say that this movie is bad. And I really want to emphasize this here as we're reaching my last point. This movie still has enough for me to recommend it. I still think there is a lot of good within this movie. It's just, I found it so perplexing how far they took the Mission Impossible formula and just decided to go away from it in its finale in a time where you really should be indulging in a lot of those things. And it's not fan service, it's not cheap, it's just what the series is. So to defy what the series is at this point and just take away what works about this franchise and what makes this franchise special and to convolute it, I found very frustrating, which brings me to the last point of this, which is the movie is at every turn forgetting that the magic of this movie is having Tom Cruise at the front and center of this film. That is the juice. That is the magic of this series. It's been that way since 1996. 30 years later, it's still that. All these films are remembered for Tom Cruise. The stunts that he does, the action sequences. It is not about the world building. Some of the characters in these are fun. There is a life to these movies that are brought to life by Tom Cruise. He gives it all to us for his entertainment. He is a jester, and we are the audience getting to laugh it up. This is a franchise that under Christopher McQuarrie has seen its heights. And it has seen Tom Cruise kind of reach new levels of stardom and action hero. Tom Cruise almost becomes divine in this franchise, so much so that this film and series almost pokes at that. Like, he is the only man for the job. He is the only one holistic enough to have the fate of the world on his fingertips. Like, he is truly the only person good enough to control, hold, and be in charge of the entity. Like, that is the Tom Cruise we are supposed to believe. And that is the magic of Tom Cruise, is that we believe it. This movie forgets that in major sections throughout. I don't care about anyone else except Tom Cruise and the people he tells us we should care about in these movies. That's the magic of Tom Cruise as well. He tells us who we care about, and we usually care about those characters. So when it cuts to the president and her board of generals making world-altering decisions, and Tom Cruise just isn't there, and it's just like this subplot of like, what would a president do in this situation? What is the right thing to do? What is leadership? All of that. I just don't care about that in this franchise, especially if it means I'm being taken away from Tom Cruise. It's so focused on the past, Final Reckoning is, in a way the franchise has never tried to be. The mission in this movie is so weird, convoluted, poorly explained, which evaporates the stakes. But yet we spend so much of the time trying to heighten those stakes. This feels like ChatGPT writing a movie. And yet, even with all the complaints, I still have to recommend it. You will never see sequences like this filmed on camera again. The biplane sequence, that 20 to 30 minute sequence, is me selling you on the movie. Go see this movie on the biggest possible screen just for that sequence. And I promise you, you won't leave hating the movie just because of that. Because there is nothing like that feeling like seeing that. I don't really want this to be the last Mission Impossible film. If it is, it kind of works in the same as all the other Mission Impossible films, where it does end off as a close because the mission that was impossible is done and he did it. That is how these films are supposed to work. So in that sense, yes, could this be a close off? It very much could be. But I also hope that it's not. I hope we get just a little bit more. And that's something I wasn't necessarily expecting to say coming out of this movie, but after seeing this movie, I just kind of hope we don't leave it with Final Reckoning. I don't want this to be the finale of this franchise, because I think there's more to do, and I think there is a better way to go off than what Final Reckoning gives us. Again, still a positive review. I am giving it 3 out of 5 stars. That's why I've officially logged it on Letterboxd. But this movie is certainly not without its flaws. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, and thank you to everyone who watched. Take care. Bye-bye.